All
There we
right.
go. All right, so we are live. Well, thank you everybody for spending your lunchtime or whatever time it is, wherever you are, with us today. We're doing something a little different today. We're not putting up any slides. We're not like teaching you new technical knowledge. Um, Mark and I, spend a lot of time teaching, attending events, interacting with a lot of people. And, when they hear how long we've been at this, we get a lot of questions about how'd you end up there? What made you get there? Or maybe assumptions that we've always done this, right? Um, particularly when we're teaching our students and they're trying to figure out where they want to go with their career or they want to make a career shift, and they're wondering, what's the magic that gets you where you want to go and where you've dreamed of. So we'll share, kind of what our journey's been like, and certainly allow you. You can use the Q&A to ask questions as we go, and then at the end, we might open it up and see if anybody wants to share their journey as well to help others figure it out. Um, so I'm Steve Gompertz. I'm one of the founders of QRx Partners, and my other founding partner is Mark Swanson, as you can see here.
You're
Uh,
on you're on
yeah,
that
yeah,
side.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I've got my reversed video on, so yeah. Um, but it's interesting because, like I said, I get it a lot from students. So how do you become a consultant, kind of thing, right? And have you always been a consultant? And it's like, no, you have to actually have some experience first, so that you have something to consult on. But I talk a lot about sometimes, how I got through this path. Even getting into the med tech industry was not where I started, not where I ever envisioned myself. I go back to my childhood, and I wanted to be an astronaut. Uh, that was sort of the dream. It was I was born in the 60s, so the space program was just coming up, and that was the cool thing. Um, and then I thought, oh yeah, well, astronauts at the time, you always had to come out of the military. So I thought, well, I'll join the Air Force, learn how to fly. I'll go to the Air Force Academy, as a matter of fact. I'll do that. And then I've got glasses, and I found out you can't be a pilot if you have glasses. At least not back then you couldn't. I think there's more.
And LASIK wasn't available at that time.
Right, and actually, even when LASIK came around, that was uh, a disqualifier as well. Unless you want to be a helicopter pilot, they would allow helicopter pilots to wear contacts or have LASIK, but jet fighter pilots, no. So I was like devastated. But then I realized the other pathway was you could get there through science, and I had an interest in geology, and I thought, well, geology, that's perfect, right? Because you go to the moon, you collect rocks, right? And I thought that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a geologist, and then I'll find my way into the space program. And then I found out geology doesn't pay very well. This is all like I'm 15 years old trying to figure out my future here and getting thwarted in every direction. Um,
Besides,
and
you can take it from Big Bang Theory, and geologists are kind of the low man on the totem pole, right? There's bird.
yeah, yeah, it was great because I set away for all this information from the U.S. Geological Society. They had all kinds of career brochures and stuff, and I remember there was one reading it. It was what completely changed my mind. It said it like the last page of this brochure said, "Look, if you're looking for a job that's going to be sort of comfortable and allow you to just live a normal life in a house with a family, geology is not for you." If you like living in a tent in weird locations and constantly doing research, and battling weird conditions, then yes, you'll love this. And I went, oh, yeah, that isn't what I thought it was. So then I went to engineering after that. Um, and I thought, well, maybe they'll take engineers eventually. And that was kind of the start, of just me getting into at least the technological side of things. And then there was the typical shifting in majors. I started out as wanting to be an electrical engineer, and then another one of those kind of weird turns where I went to Lehigh University, and we had an engineering one course, and part of that was every week one of the department directors would come in and give a presentation about what's a day in the life of this type of engineer. And the second week was the electrical engineering department head, and he came in and started talking about what an electrical engineer does, and I went, "Oops, that isn't what I thought it was either." And I'm
That's all right,
here.
Steve. There's only so many of us that can be out there. You have to have you can't spell geek without a double E.
That's right. I was going to use exactly that line because we used to use it all the time. And
Yeah.
then it was like the following week, the head of the mechanical engineering department came in. I went, "Oh, that sounds like me." So I shifted my majors then. But
You just
the
couldn't
story
make
is
it
right.
as an
Your life
electric.
does go through these changes, and you got to kind of be ready to go with the flow. I'm sorry, what were you saying, Mark?
You just couldn't make it as an electrical engineer.
Yeah, those were hard courses, is my understanding. We took one EE course, and I didn't like it because they made us take like a chemical engineering course and an electrical engineering course, and it was like, "Oh, these are awful. I don't want to do this."
Cool.
Yeah,
I'll catch you up on just so we get caught up
yeah.
on my background too. So, I was gonna go be an electrical engineer, probably from the time I was in fifth or sixth grade, maybe.
Mhm. Mm,
Um, and so I always knew that was kind of the direction I wanted to go. Um, as I was going through high school, got interested in this. Here you are in a middle class. I don't have any money. Parents don't have any money. How am I going to get to school?
mm,
And so I applied for ROTC scholarships, um, looking for those types of things. I knew that I didn't want to go in the Marines. I knew that I didn't want to go in the Army. Um, Air Force or Navy could have been either one. Um, but then when you go through that process, you have to choose one. And so I chose the Navy one because Navy goes all over the world, probably more than any other service. Um, you're on a ship, right? So the ship's moving around.
mhm.
You're not in one place um, all the time. And so I decided I was going to go in the Navy. Unbeknownst to me, ROTC is a naval scholarship, which means the Marines and the Navy are together. And because I had declined to go to the Marine Corps one, they canceled the Navy one as well.
Oh,
And so that was my little bit of a beginning. Because of that, I enlisted in the Navy, and went into the Naval Nuclear Power Program, and went through that training. So yeah, I'm a nuke by heart, what they call. So I went through my initial schools and got qualified as a mechanical operator at a reactor. And so I have that background as well. Um, I was a pretty good guy, pretty good performer though, and so I applied for the scholarship through my command there, because I had been as picked up. This is maybe going back to the instructor thing. I got picked up as a staff instructor because
mm,
of my performance there, and then got recommended for an ROTC scholarship from the command there,
mm.
and was able then to come back to the University of Minnesota and get my degree in electrical engineering. So I'm a local guy, born and raised. Steve comes from somewhere out east. I don't know where it is.
I'm a Jersey
Um,
boy. Yeah, yeah,
so I grew up,
yeah.
just blocks away from the Medtronic start in the garage off of Fillmore. I was, in off of 49th and University, still there. I remember the 100 Twin, which is where the operational headquarters is now. And I also remember Mac say all this the Guidant, actually CPI before that, right? Before it all became Boston Scientific. Um, so I know got a big part of the background, Earl Bakken, and a lot of the initial people at Medtronic were our neighbors around that area, and so I went to school with a lot of people that their parents worked at Medtronic. Um, and so, of course, after I served my time in the Navy, um, came back here, and was picked up at Medtronic, and swore because I had swore at that time I was never going to be in quality. And so this whole thing about design assurance sounded different. So design was where I wanted to be. So design assurance didn't sound so bad. And then I found out I was actually in quality.
Yeah, right. You kind of fall into it. So,
Uh,
for those listening, right? I mean, I think you're going to hear a pretty constant theme here. we all have our dreams and our hopes and our plans, and you should have those, but you need to be flexible because life rarely gets you exactly what you thought it was going to give you, right? Um, and it could still turn out just fine. And
Yep.
don't be depressed when it didn't work out exactly as you had written it down on paper, right? And I know some people do that, right? They say write your goals down, and that was a constant story for me as well. So I switched to mechanical engineering and I graduated with that degree. And then I've told people I've never been a mechanical engineer in my career. I got out of college and dating me a little bit when I was in college, I was one of the first, graduates or undergraduates in the country to be taught CAD systems. That was kind of a very advanced technology, typically only shown to graduate students. And Lehigh, we had to take a drafting course, and we spent the first couple of weeks on a drafting board, pencil and paper, and then they switched to the CAD systems, and nobody had ever seen these things before. And I was like, "This is the future. I love this. I want to go out and be an engineer who uses this kind of tool." And they showed us other tools like finite element analysis and some other things that were really cool. And the shift there was I didn't get to become a mechanical engineer who used these tools. I got hired by a computer company, Control Data Corporation, to create that software.
Yeah.
And so I became a software engineer. And I used to joke with all my software engineer friends about that we didn't have real degrees. That, that was the first job I took. And it was even funnier because the first job I got creating software was software for electrical design. So I was right back in the electrical world.
Yeah. And Steve, I mean, I remember it too. When you first started off and going through college, you'd go into the rooms, right, and it was all drafting tables, right? Um,
Yeah.
the big attached protractor,
Arms and yeah,
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 arms
the
and stuff.
rulers and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what classrooms look like when we when we were in college, which was in the 90s and stuff. Because I again I spent those couple years in the Navy and then came back, then got my college degree. So here I
Yeah.
was, just a little bit older than your general freshman, but
Yeah.
anyway, we eventually got through.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
But yeah, I just remember how cool those CAD systems were, right? And you'd never seen anything like it. This is basically 2D wireframe. I think we did a little bit of 3D wireframe. Solid modeling didn't exist yet, like you see today with the photorealistic, models. Um, but it was still just completely cool, and that was what I wanted to do. But yeah, so I ended up creating electrical design software, like circuit board designs. Um, but right, you always got to look for, I've been talking to my own sons about, right, investment moves in your career, right, where you want to learn something, and it may not be the ultimate place you want to end up, but it's going to help you, right, fill out your background, right, make you more robust in your capabilities.
one of the things
Um,
that comes up for people now, Steve, is a lot of people go to internships. Did you have an internship opportunity in your
I
college career?
did not. It was interesting.
It-
It seemed like when I was in school, the only students who got internships were people who had parents in the industry, like
in
they
the
had
industry.
parents who were engineers.
Yeah, And
And I was the first engineer in my family, so I had no connections anywhere, and I didn't even know how to get an internship. I had enough trouble just getting a summer job.
yeah.
But
And
I do feel that that was important, right? Because I could see that those people got jobs faster. A lot of times they just got hired on by wherever they did the internship.
yep,
Um, to me, it seemed like a long time. I graduated and I didn't get a job until 6 months later. But the economy wasn't great. Um, but everybody who had an internship, boom, they were employed, the week after they got out of school. So I was a little jealous, but I was like, my
yeah.
family were, blue collar and business owner types, and I was not going into business. Not then. Now I,
And I have to say, for me, it's not some of the same things, but I was an ROTC, so every summer that I had to go on a cruise
oh,
in the Navy. So
yeah,
I had 2 to 3 weeks that was spent on board a ship somewhere, and so can't really do an internship when that's going on. However, of course, you have people that are alongside you, and those people that are going to internships, and I would say the same thing. that practical experience put them a step ahead of us.
Hmm.
And I was always wishing that I could have done an internship. And so it was when my daughter was going through at Stout, it was one of those things that was automatic. You need to do an internship every summer.
Yeah, and
Right?
then that's one of the things I like. So, we both teach, Mark and I both teach in St. Cloud State University's MedTech Master's program, and that is now for the quality program. That's essentially a requirement that you need to do an internship at the end. And I think that's really smart that they did that because they recognize that's going to help their students, fulfill their career objectives. So yeah, I think internships are really valuable. I think I won't say it's easier to get it. You don't have to have connections necessary to get them anymore. And particularly if whatever educational program you're in is making that a requirement, then they usually also offer a conduit, right, to finding those things, the support to help you find internships. So yeah, I agree. Those are really important. So I was talking about like investment moves, right? And sometimes you don't recognize what you're learning until you realize later you have something you could apply. So right, as I was developing software, what you learn there is logic, right? You have to have good, sturdy logic and the most efficient way to get through it, right? What I didn't realize is later in life, that would become a really useful skill in doing things like process development and process mapping. Um, but back then, it was just like, okay, yeah, I got to make sure the logic works for this, and we want, the users want the software to work as fast as possible. So there's multiple ways to write this code, and I got to make sure I pick the best pathway through the code, and it processes it well and uses the available capabilities of the hardware at the time efficiently. And so that became a really good building block for me. Um, from there, I started to get more into implementing those software solutions rather than building them for our company's clients or customers, um, which then, without my realizing it, got me into project management, right? Because you have to lay out a plan. How am I going to roll this out? Am I going to train people? Am I going to, you know, build up their skills so they can use the tool effectively, build a strategy for them to understand how and when to use those tools. And that became the next thing I learned without realizing it was now I was a good project manager as a result. Yeah.
And I think for me, being an electrical engineer, it helps you understand, how things fit together and the
Mhm.
processes. You can visualize that a little bit more
Yeah.
without having to see it. And so, again, my initial jobs at Medtronic in design assurance, I came in at a time in the perfusion systems part of the business that had just brought three companies together. It was Biomedicus, Avacor, and blood management all came together into this one business unit called Perfusion Systems. And of course, each of those companies came with their own processes.
Sure. Yeah.
So just as I was joining there and looking at it, you have three processes. Can't we just make this into one? And so, because I was just getting into design assurance and I was the lone engineer within the design assurance group,
Mhm.
I was tasked with put these procedures together. And that's where I got into quality management systems. And so starting to understand how all of these processes fit together from design controls with document controls, with all of these various pieces and understanding how quality management works um, and needs to work efficiently
Mhm.
to keep from slowing the projects down. And that's where a lot of my, again, learning came from is you can't just have processes to have processes. You need to help the work move through the system. And so that interaction, that interconnection has to be understood by people, and you have to understand it within your quality management system processes. So that's how I really got into quality management. And of course, being in design assurance, risk management kind of came along with that territory as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So understanding the processes for risk management and how to apply risk management processes and teaching others how to do it to keep the projects from slowing down. Because again, where do you get stuck all the time? Well, these 4 hour or 6 hour risk management meetings are really slowing progress down. Can't we do this better? And
Yeah.
so learning ways to do that and helping the organization get there quicker. Um,
Yeah, my
that.
journey in the quality still took a while longer. I mean, I spent 7 years in the computer industry with control data until they ran that company into the ground. Um, and then I lucked out, really. There was a job at Medtronic. Medtronic was taking off, heading towards its first $1 billion, and they were investing heavily in, technology and tools like CAD systems, computer-aided engineering tools, but they didn't really know what to do with them. They could afford them, the best of the class, but they didn't know what to do. And I got a job saying, "Oh yeah, I can help you put a strategy together, train your engineers on the right way to use these tools together," right? So now, right, without realizing it, we're sort of like systems thinking, how to put things together, activities, and make them flow, and right, So I don't realize it, but I'm sort of building part of the quality system for them. But I'm focused still on IT kind of stuff, is what I thought of myself as, and an expert in CAD and CAE, and that was really where I was heading, was trying to be an expert, and I had some recognition outside of the Twin Cities, with other experts, things like that. But in the back of my head, I wanted to get into organizational leadership. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I turn this into a management position, right? How do I build a department, a CAD or a CAE department? Because we had some other similar departments in at Medtronic. They had like a software tools department, software development tools department, and there was an electrical CAE group. And I thought, well, we need a mechanical CAE group, and there was just no support for that in management. And I just was banging my head against the wall, and I thought, well, maybe I could get into, actually designing medical devices, be a project leader for that. But I'd never done any actual design of the med devices. I was always just showing them how to use the tools to do that. And finally, I had a really good mentor that Medtronic they had a career development office, and it was actually really well staffed. And the guy there, you know, said, "All right, sit down and tell me, what is it you're shooting for? Right, write your ideal job title down, or titles down, right?" And I only wrote one. And that was the first lesson. He goes, "Why did you only write one title down?" He says, "That limits your pathways if you only got one." He said, "Think of your skills." And so he showed me how to kind of do a matrix of my skills, soft skills, technical skills, and then think more broadly about, well, wait, what other job titles would apply there, right? With that support. And that kind of opened it up. And I went, oh, all right, maybe it doesn't have to be just CAD stuff, right? I'm a good project manager, and I know IT really well. And so the next move I made within which Medtronic, and the other thing he challenged me on was, how much do you know about a med tech company if you've only ever been in the R&D group? You've never seen the others.
Yeah.
And I had a friend there who was pushing me to take a job on the operations side as a project manager for operational systems like factory floor systems. And I kept pushing back, going, I don't know that stuff. And the job coach went, exactly, you don't know that stuff. Go take that job. If they're telling you they want you, go grab that opportunity, right? And it was like everybody around me knew what I should be doing, and I couldn't see it because I had just put these blinders on and I had one path.
And
And so I
one
did
of the
that. I took the job and left that area where I felt really comfortable and learned a great lesson. Get uncomfortable,
yeah.
because it was really uncomfortable.
So, because I was in the design assurance group, right? And then Medtronic has one of their annual layoffs. And of course, then the quality group gets a little bit smaller. And anytime a group gets smaller, guess what? There's some more hats that you need to take up.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
And so now I had to also take operational quality in the electronics manufacturing area, and help, run that, lead that, um, pick those things up. And then, of course, then we don't have any supplier quality engineers, so somebody's got to take up the supplier quality piece. So you start gathering all of these
Yep.
things, and all of a sudden you're covering the whole gambit from design assurance through operations quality and supplier quality. And then the boss says, "Hey, I like that model. Why don't you teach everybody else how to do those similar things across the line?" And so, that's how you start all of a sudden expanding your influence and those types of things, and continue to
Mhm.
grow your sphere of influence and how things are going. So all of a sudden now, instead of just design controls, I'm also looking at manufacturing processes and process controls and calibration
Mhm.
and all of these other areas that are all of a sudden now things that we can do improvement for. And so that's where I got all of a sudden I was put in charge of calibration the day before an audit, and it was a disaster. And so then you start learning about continual improvement and the fact that when you create plans, it keeps the auditors from writing nonconformities because you have plans. And so
Right.
quality planning becomes a very important thing as we go across the board, whether it's new projects, change projects, improvement projects, all of those types of things that you can get into planning and understanding the importance of that. And again, risk management, understanding, how do I mitigate risk, and those types of things in all of these situations, um, again, comes true.
Yeah.
So,
So yeah, like I said, so now I'm still doing IT, but I'm on a different side of the street, literally, right? The way Medtronic was set up in their Fridley operations, the Rice Creek campus. Um, and then at some point, an opportunity comes around. One of the projects I had worked on when I first got to Medtronic was helping them implement their first PDM system, or what we would now think of as an EQMS, for the dock control function. And the guy who had been managing the department for a long time was retiring, and they needed somebody to run the department, and nobody wanted it. It was considered a problem area. And they looked at me and they said, "Well, wait, you helped put the system into that department, and we know you're looking for a management position. Would you take this one?" And I went, "Yes." Because it had that word manager in it. That was all I understood, right? I didn't think about, oh, it gets me into quality. That was not a consideration. And so I became the head of dock control, or what they call configuration assurance, at Medtronic, which then it helped me achieve that goal of wanting to be, an organizational leader, a people leader. But it put me in the quality organization without realizing it. And I wasn't really thinking about that. I was focused on how do I make this department have a better reputation and help my people be successful and get it staffed correctly and, all that kind of good stuff. Get our, you know, processes well defined. And then we got a new director of quality systems, and he became my next mentor and was the one. It was around the time when um, it was basically 2000, and it was right when ISO 9000 was introducing the process approach, right? And so they rewrote the standard, which became to me and everybody else really confusing because the sort of the functional view was really easy to understand. Now they want you to see the bigger picture, and I'm baffled, and everybody else is baffled. And this guy who came in as the quality system director understood it really well and was able to teach it to me at least. And the light bulb went on, and I went, "This is like the code in a software program. There's a logic flow, there's process, right? And there's connections, and you got to figure out the right way through that and not create a rat's nest of connections." And for me, that was the turning point where I went, I love this idea. Quality systems, yes, it's perfect for me. And then I started diving in and going, oh, we're not doing this right. And this could be more efficient. And look, we've not laid out the quality system well from the quality manual level. And you talked about like having to integrate new entities that were acquired or just merge areas that, we're allowed to operate with separate quality systems. How do you bring those prospects together? And that was the start of I don't want to ever leave quality for me. This was just a perfect match with everything that had led me up to this point and just seemed to really play to my strengths and what energized me from there.
and I think for me, what was going on in my life as I get to that mid-career was, um, I had a bug to start my own business. So I went into something totally related, right? Financial planning. Uh, and of course, this was in 2008, which, if you all remember, that was kind of recession time. And so that didn't work out so well. And ended up got a call back from my manager that was at Medtronic and said, I have a job for you. And they had just received their first major nonconformity in several years, and it had to do with risk management files.
Ah,
And so here I was to come in, my special project was to remediate 120 risk management files for for the devices, and create a project plan to do that. And so that's how I got into heavy risk management, because I had already had a little bit of experience with it in design and that kind of stuff. But now I was in charge of all of the files for all of the products across all of cardiac surgery. And so created those files. And because, as I started to get into this, I'm like, wait a minute. Why is risk management so disconnected from the rest of the processes here? Why does it not go into non-conforming material and complaint handling and CAPA and all of these other areas that it should be connected to? And so as I started understanding that, I can't just fix and remediate these files because if I do that, then you come back 2 years later and they'll all be out of compliance again because it's so disconnected. And
Yeah.
so I started working across businesses throughout Medtronic on understanding risk management. And of course, that brought me into some post-market surveillance. Post-market surveillance connected me to not just post-market surveillance reporting, but clinical evaluation reporting, all of those other things. And so I became the post-market expert and also risk management files. Because of that, um, when Medtronic had a person, again, another one of those mentors, right, that was tasked with helping write the next version of 13485 in 2011, he came across and said, I need you to come to a meeting with the ISO working group and help explain how this connects into ISO 13485. And of course, that's where I met people like Kim Troutman and several others that are on the writing group and got involved with that. A guy named Ed Kimmelman was the convener at the time. And so it's like anything else. And, the point of our discussions here is to help people understand how do you take the next step in your career and how do you stay into this. And so I volunteered to help write some of the pieces of the standard.
Mhm.
Because I volunteered for that, of course, like any other volunteer organization, when you got somebody saying, I'll help, they're like, here, you want more, you want more. And so
Yeah.
eventually, through that, I became the guy that was typing the standard at our working group meetings and that kind of stuff. Got heavily involved in that. And then even after I left Medtronic, another year later, I stayed in the working group through my own consulting firm. At the time called H&M Consulting that came together with Steve to form QRx. So,
Yeah. So that's a
so
good segue because I was gonna, as you were talking, I was thinking about taking a step back and some of the things I learned that I think have been important in helping me, you know, get good at this and be in a position to be a consultant, right? Somebody whose opinion is listened to. And back when I was doing project management, something that became obvious to me because I tended to have this thing where I picked up existing projects that were failing and then had pretty good success at turning them around. And as I looked around, a lot of people were given, titles of project leader, project manager, right? Usually you took the most technically proficient engineer you had and say, well, now you're going to lead the next project, right? Without really thinking about what project management requires.
yeah,
And people who follow me on LinkedIn know I'm very fond of saying, don't be a hobbyist. You're a professional. There's a difference. And what I found among project leaders, project managers is most of them were hobbyists. They had never gotten any training. They'd learned it anecdotally or just took a stab at it. But I was actually, when they said, "Oh, you need to lead some projects," I said, "Well, can I go to this course over here and learn some project management techniques and time management, things like that?" And eventually, I got, well, not a certification, but a certificate in project management. There was a certificate offered. I was taught by the guy who literally wrote the original PMBOK, the project management body of knowledge. Um, so great opportunity there. But it showed me, right? For all things we do, there are standards, there's science, right? There is existing body of knowledge, and you don't have to guess at it. You should go out and learn this and take advantage of it, right? Which then gets you in the role, like you were talking about, to then participate in advancing it,
yeah,
right? Which is another good way to demonstrate your capabilities. But the start is go learn it for real, right?
right,
Don't rely on what the person who's been at it for 20 years is telling you. That they may know a lot, but they also bring a lot of biases. Um, so that while I was in project management, getting serious about being a project manager kind of got me into that mindset. And then when I got into quality and started to learn about quality systems, I did the same thing. And I went, great mentor. Thank you for showing me the light. I need to go out and get some certifications. I need to go take some training on this, and I'm going to become a student of this, a hard, deep diving into it kind of student. And I think that's where, it gets us to this point where now people come to us and ask us, how, wait, what's their, how do you actually interpret this the right way? Is because we're not guessing at it. Now, I can think back on all kinds of anecdotal lesson failures over the years. When we teach class and we have to talk about the difference between verification, validation, and qualification. And I remember very succinctly at Medtronic when I first started to hear those terms, and I asked somebody who had been there for like 30 years, what's the difference? And he gave me a very logical explanation. I went, oh, okay, great. Now I understand it. And the next day I was in a meeting and it was coming up again. And the conversation, the way people were talking about it, was different than what he had explained to me. So I asked those people, I said, I'm sorry, maybe I'm confused because yesterday I had somebody explain this to me. Could you guys tell me your definitions of this stuff? And I got like three different versions of it in that meeting from different people. And I was like, okay, this is a problem. Nobody actually seems to understand this. I need to go get some actual training on this. I need to
Right.
go read the standard myself, right? Which I hadn't even done at that point. I was just totally relying. And so, again, that lesson of go find out. It's out there for
Well,
you to actually understand this stuff.
Steve, and I was gonna, because one of the things I was gonna say here is that, sometimes people pay lip service to lifelong learning,
Mm,
and it's that willingness to learn, and maybe you're wrong sometimes, and then you start asking the question, well, where did that come from? Um, and people talk about, well, that's in the standard, and I'm like, where? I don't see it. And they're like, oh, it's not in there. I'm like, well, now where do I go?
right. Yeah.
Those types of things. But kind of bringing that lifelong learning too. It's the reason I went and got my MBA. As I said, wanted to run a business and start running my consulting business. You have to understand business. As a quality engineer, often people would say, "Well, you don't understand the business." I'm like, "Okay, fine. I'll go get some education in this, and we can start talking about it." Just like you're saying, going back and getting, finding out more,
Right.
um, asking the questions. I also had gotten a project management cert. I think those are important skills
Mhm.
to be able to understand, because as a consultant and getting into this, you need to understand managing the project, managing requirements, all of these things that come from managing, different things. Um, because not everybody does it the same way that you do it. And so the best way to do that, to manage it, is write it down. I often tell people, a lot of people were saying, what makes your consulting business different than others? And I'm like, well, because other people got into it, like you just said, as a hobbyist. They got laid off, they're between jobs or this stuff, so they became a consultant. When I became a consultant, I wrote a business plan. I wrote our plan of where we were going. What was the next steps? Who were my target companies? All of those types of things. And the studies will tell you by simply writing it down, you increase your probability of success by a lot.
Right. Yep. So we have an interesting question in the Q&A from Leslie about how do you get your employees to invest in you to get this formal knowledge. So first, I'm going to start with another story because I always have a story. Um, so late in my time at Medtronic, as I realized I wanted to get certified in different things related to quality, I had a manager who didn't support that. She actually said to me one day, "Why would you want to do that? You don't want to stay in quality the rest of your career, do you?" Right? That was her view that this was a temporary step. Quality, and then I get it. A lot of companies, it sort of is sort of a side way, and then you come back into the organization. And I was just like, well, actually, yeah, I do want to be in quality forever. But she was not supportive of that. Um, Now there was lots of other reasons for this, but I left. Um, that was just one factor among many where it just became obvious it was time for me to go learn from other companies. So one, right? Especially like you said, in a smaller company and the maybe they don't have the resources to send you to a $10,000 certification course or something like that. Um, at some point, you got to look at it and go, you might have to figure out how you're going to invest in it yourself. And I get it, that's not a great thing,
I was
right?
gonna, Steve, we're coming to the same spot because
Yeah,
this is exactly what I was thinking is that at some point it's your career, it's not your company's career.
yeah,
You have to decide to do it yourself. I've had some similar experiences. I mean, because when you go through budget cutting, what's the first thing that gets cut? The training budget,
right. Yeah.
or it didn't exist to begin with because that's what got cut in the budget making process because I had to give something up.
Hmm.
Right? And I'm not going to give up people, so I'm going to give this up. So it's your career. Take advantage of it. That kind of stuff. There are programs and stuff like that. So yes, I use the tuition reimbursement to get my MBA, but they have to have those programs. In some ways, some good employers have investments in their people. Keep in mind that may, create an obligation for you to be there for a certain period of time and those kinds of things. So whether or not you use the program or
Yeah.
do something else, that's up to you.
Yeah. The other thing I was saying is, you don't have to jump into the deep end. All right. You don't have to go with the $10,000 option. There are free webinars out there to learn from, lots of them. There are $150, webinars and seminars. Um, so there are cost effective ways to start down that journey and learn things that will get you, then you can bring it back and then you can demonstrate, apply that knowledge. And the best thing in the world is to have somebody go, "How'd you know how to do that?" Right? Right? Meaning you did something right. And then you build on that. Now you have a more of a case to make with your manager of going, "Look, I paid for this myself, and look what I did. I just saved the company X dollars or made this work when it wasn't working. Imagine what would happen if you let me go get certified, right? And dropped a couple of thousand instead, right? And you could just start building on that from there. So again, it's sort of like when I met with my job coach and he was saying, "Why are you so constrained to one title?" Don't think of there's only one pathway through your education, right? And your ongoing sharpening the saw, as Covey called it. There are
And
lots of pathways.
sometimes that on the job experience and just taking additional responsibilities will help you get that job. Because right now I don't need to hire another person. I got you to do that for me. Don't be afraid of, oh, I hate to say this word, right? Failure. Don't be afraid of failure. Your best learning opportunities sometimes come through that failure. We joke when Steve and I teach lots of times, we have our 25 plus years of experience that we're trying to give you to you in the classroom, so you don't have to make the same mistakes that we made, right? There are
And I
lots
made
of
plenty.
opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
And the second part I'll give is find a mentor. Steve mentioned it a couple times. I've mentioned it. If you find a mentor that understands, what you want to achieve in your career, lots of times they can help you along.
And I was going to say you were heading down a path before, and I forgot I wanted to veer off. And there is another question that popped up. We can
Yep.
hop in a second. But um, you know, another thing to be careful of, right, is your pride. Um, it doesn't matter how long you're at this, there's something that you're not understanding exactly the right way, right? Or something is going to change, and you need to keep up with that change. And
This happens
I
for
learned
Steve
so
all
much
this
from you,
this
right? I mean,
this
my
happens for
evolution
Steve
in
all the
risk
time when I
management
talk.
understanding, right? I mean, I thought I was really knowledgeable in risk management, and and then I met you, and you understand all the ins and outs of what was actually decided. And over the years, every once in a while, I go, "Oh shoot, I've been doing that wrong the whole time." Right? And I've been teaching it wrong, right? So you've got to be open to that, not be embarrassed by it or just fail to admit it because you don't want to admit failure. It's like, okay, I need to adopt that new thinking and change that and now make that the way I move forward.
And I tell people all the time, um, you know, you a question you can always ask when somebody says you have to do it this way, you can say, "I'm looking to learn. Show me where that is."
Yeah.
Show me where that is in the standards, show me where that is in a guidance document, show me where that is in our processes, right? And so if you're looking to learn and solidify that learning, again, you've made a mistake. Now solidify the learning and the correction, the improvement by, getting the foundation back to, where it came from.
Yeah. So I think the other thing when we talk about right the cost of learning this stuff is things like free networking events.
Yeah.
Right, get to know people. And I'm an introvert. I walk into a crowded room and I'm overwhelmed, but I've learned over time I just say hi, right, and start a conversation because you will meet people that you can learn something from, right?
Always.
Yeah, always. There's always something to be learned there. I was going to go down a different point there coming off of that, and I forgot it. But hopefully it'll come back to me later. So let's say
I'll
what was the
I'll
other question
I'll,
then?
I'll pick up Andrew's
Okay.
question too, the success and mindset for career
Yeah.
changers. One of the things that has to happen is you have to be transferable, I'll say. Those transferable skills. Steve talked about, coming from a computer industry mindset and into med device and understanding how he fit in to that. It was obviously a different industry, but there's ways that you fit in. Whether it's working into a manufacturing operations role and understanding, I worked in one of the, I'll just give an example because um, when I was running the master's program at St. Cloud State, we had a person that they actually came through the DEED program, which is Minnesota's Department of Economic Development. And they were a career changer. They were, believe it or not, working for Kodak in the film industry. We all know where that is right now. And she wanted to move into Medtronic, and I said, well, this master's program, these types of things, understanding the speak, not understanding all of the concepts, but understanding the speak. Take the initial course. Um, the 101, it's the 620 course in quality management because now you get the speak, and being able to understand the acronyms, all of those types of things. If you can talk the talk, that's your opening to get in the door. Is a big, to me, a big thing. So as you go to the networking events and hear about, what other people are doing, you can ask them, well, what's your experience in that area? How do I talk to somebody from that, thing? And then you start thinking of how do I use my experience into that area. Now, I think both of us talked about one of the things that happens for younger people right now is internships. Neither one of us had the opportunity to do an internship. So when I came to Medtronic and was interviewing, I had to be able to talk about how, as a process engineer at an electronics contract manufacturing, I can use that to understand the manufacturing processes, to understand the design and development at Medtronic. Those types of things is how you have to be able to talk to it and figure out the skills that you've had, the experience you've had. How can I apply that to the company that I'm interviewing at? Right?
Yep, agreed. Agreed. Excellent. Let's see. Mac put something into the Q&A here about quality having several specific roles. Quality reg affairs is one of the few functional areas that's involved throughout total product lifecycle processes from idea to approval. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's another good um, perspective here. Um, when we talk about careers in quality or regulatory, it's not like there's one role. I'm quality. Mark alluded to the different types of things he'd done with calibration or, risk management and design assurance. Um, and again, I think that helps with what are your transferable skills because being like a manufacturing quality engineer is not the same as being a quality systems specialist or being a risk management specialist. So, and the same thing happens with reg affairs. They're not all doing this sort of similar job. There are different roles within regulatory affairs, and as Mac points out,
Yeah.
throughout the life cycle of the product, there are different things that go on under that same umbrella of either quality or regulatory. So your opportunities are there to say, oh, my skills would fit into this part of the process,
And
right? Once you
sometimes it's
understand that.
just sheer luck that you walk
There is
into.
that, right? Like me being asked to
I
run the dock control department
yeah.
because
Well,
nobody
and
else
so what
wanted it.
happened for me for Reg Affairs is I was the lead quality person on a project that was moving towards its submission for release, and the Reg Affairs person that we had left. And so there was no more reg affairs person. So guess what? The quality person has to step up and make put everything together for the regulatory submission and understand what goes into this and how do you communicate with the regulator and all of these pieces and bringing that together. Yes, we brought another person on, but they have to get up to speed, and I'm already up to speed because I've already got all of these things and understand all of the deliverables, everything that's in the documentation, where it is, how it connects, all of those types of things. So guess what? You're now a regulatory affairs person.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a lot more overlap between the disciplines now, right?
Yeah,
Between quality and regulatory. I was just telling my students the other night, I said, when I was at Medtronic, I didn't know anybody in regulatory.
right.
I wasn't even quite sure what they did. I knew there was a regulatory team. I didn't know what building they were in. I never met any of them. But I was in the quality organization because quality had its own VP and regulatory had its own VP. These days, it's more common to have a VP of quality and regulatory, right? But
Correct.
I understand there's a
Can you
lot of
guys hear
overlap.
me? Can I
Yeah,
step
hi,
up?
Yep,
Mac.
we can hear
Yeah,
you,
I
Mac.
see you on hear me. So I'll be real brief. I know we got just a few minutes, but I really like this for the audience here because it's in your name, right? QRX, quality and regulatory. And you're right, Steve. We're joined at the hip. We're partners, and I got a long story which I won't tell. Spare you that. But I got pulled in from operations. I got pulled into a corporate audit compliance role to fix a consent decree back at CPI. So
Yeah,
I had the skill set, but I'm like, whoa, what the heck? How do you go from purchasing to this, right? Well, it was fantastic experience. It was brutal, but I learned everything about quality, and and so while I'm in that role, I'm looking at reg, and I see that these guys are kind of back to your point, Steve, of project management. Reg specialist, at least on the pre-market side, will be assigned to a team, whether it's a new product idea or a major change or sort of evolution of a product, and work through the entire product development lifecycle step and get the approval, right? Not so much on the post-market, but that was really what caught my eye, right? And so I moved from quality now that I had this, like you two, really strong base in systems and compliance and just started writing submissions, right? So it was a really natural sort of evolution to pivot, and I guess the closing point here is that, you can pivot from quality to regulatory to quality back and forth because there are so much overlap. And they really, I'll just kind of end on the thought that they really are a big influence in the culture of not only the
of the
company and
company.
organization, but
Yeah,
the team,
yeah,
right? They're not the enforcers. I had one anecdote. I won't name the company. I've worked for a few. But what your point, Mark, about, well, I don't even know anybody in regulatory. What does regulatory do? Well, the marketing lead thought that I was the sales prevention team.
yeah,
Yeah, I've heard
I'm
that
like,
too.
wow, we got some cultural issues here. If you think I'm the enemy, I'm
Yeah,
like,
right.
you,
Yeah, I
you
hear you.
don't get to sell anything till I get it approved. So
Yeah.
anyway, but
And I think,
that's
part of the title of today's thing was right, why we never left, right? And I think it's because whether you're in quality or regulatory, you will get the opportunity to get involved in so many aspects of the operations, right? Of the business and of the life cycle of the device. So the opportunities are there. Being in med tech, first of all, we talked about this with my students the other night. Once you're in, you never want to do anything else, right? Because you recognize what you're doing for people, for the greater good, right? And what a great reward every day that you have this opportunity to impact people's lives. But yeah, quality and regulatory, I alluded to earlier, right? Used to be this sort of side path, almost like a punishment. When I was at Control Data, that was sort of where they sent executives who had fallen out of favor, was they made
yeah,
them the head of quality, right? Except one guy said, "Oh no, I'm going to make this into something," right? I don't know if everybody knows Gary Floss. He's fairly well known in the quality circles. He's retired now. But Gary went in and said, "Oh, great, thanks. I want to be in quality and I'm going to turn this into a real thing," and started teaching quality concepts. And this is where I first got my first formal training in quality because he was pushing Philip Crosby. That was his favorite, and that's the book I first read and kind of like those approaches. And for me, the light bulb went on to go, oh, quality is an actual profession, an actual career opportunity. Like I said, it still took me like another 10 years to end up there. But once I was in, it was like, yeah, this is again, not a hobby. This is a profession. So is regulatory. And yes, you can make a great rewarding career
And I,
in that realm.
and I had turned Mac's mic on so that
Yeah.
he could bring some of these pieces. There's one other person that I want to invite into the conversation is Jude.
Hmm.
Jude, you've been a consultant for quite some time as well, and now you're out on your own. What would you say as far as, getting in consulting, in the consulting side of the business, and working across these lines, so to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's been a really interesting journey for myself. Like you said, why did we get into this business and stay here? I've been in the business honestly since I graduated from college. And my whole thing was that, I found products that never were correct and had issues with them. So I kind of been guided all along to try and, make things much better, create excellence in products, whether it's consumer products, aerospace products, or medical products as I went through my career. And, through that career, I've gained a wealth of knowledge about manufacturing, about computer systems, about quality engineering. Uh, I would say looking at project management. And I was a consultant for 11 years for another bigger company. So gained a great deal of knowledge about understanding like the business sense of the, what you need to do, working with different clients, understanding, how to make sure that you've taken care of the clients in a correct way, creating correct deliverables, making sure projects get done within a reasonable amount of time and that they're completed with the correct budget. So I learned quite a bit about that. And so recently I did just decide to go out on my own, and it's been a little bit of an experience so far.
Yeah.
Um, learning how to tackle things on my own, but I think
We
it's
call
really
that
good.
making the leap.
Yeah.
Yes, making the leap. And it's a little
Well,
bit of a leap, but understanding the business and with all the people that I know within the business, it's not that big of a leap anymore.
one of the things I want to finish up with though is consulting is not for everybody. Steve talked about it not being a hobby. This is a profession. And understanding, how to fit together because there's business aspects of it. You got to sell yourself, sell your, skills and that kind of stuff all the time. Every project is another sale. Steve talked about being an introvert. You got to learn to be when to be that extrovert and talk about those things in order to be able to do that. There are some people that should be employees of larger companies. They need those employees. They need those skills. Again, not everybody can be an independent consultant and go from company to company because what you quickly find, and I think Jude, kind of alluded to that, is not every company does it the same. As a consultant, you have to be a little bit of a chameleon to be able to fit into their processes. Not your way is not always the way it has to be done. You have to understand, how to fit into that company's culture, all of those types of things. Steve and I do a lot of cultural consulting as well, and helping people understand what it is to have a positive quality culture, and those types of things. And sometimes it's affecting a bigger change than just the processes and projects, but there's bigger things at work that you have to understand how to influence that. And so, Steve, I'll give you the last minute because we've gone over a
Yeah,
little bit.
we're 2 minutes over. I do. Leslie posted an interesting question. I think is a good way to end. Asking if you were starting your regular today, what's the first skill or training you'd focus on to be most attractive? Mark mentioned project management. I do think those are just a foundational kind of skill. Everything is a project, and being able to show that you understand how to get things done can be really important. Other than that, and I harp on this when I'm teaching about quality systems, is that process approach, that systems kind of thinking that I said I learned early on when I was designing software. You have to see the connections. If you can show that you can see the bigger picture, I think that makes you more attractive, right? If you just focus in and go, "Oh, I'm an expert on Kappa or on process monitoring," all right, that's great. That's a deep dive, but where that's supposed to, those things are supposed to connect to other parts of the quality system. And that's what's often missing in most companies' quality systems are those connections that truly create effectiveness for the quality system. So
Then that leads into continual improvement. So that's all those projects that, plan, do, check, act. As you move through that process, you discover what's the issue, you do something about it, you verify that it worked, you check it, and then you continue to improve that. Always be be willing to be wrong, and say we can be better. So,
exactly. So, all right. Well, with that, I think we'll thank everybody. Appreciate
yep,
you guys spending some time with us today. Hopefully, you found it useful and interesting. We had a great time talking about this.
yep.
Again, look for our next quarterly webinar. We've not picked a topic yet, and so if you want to contact us and go, you know what, we'd like to really hear you guys talk about, we will certainly take that under advisement. So we're always looking for good ideas. So, so thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jude.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you,
Mac.
Steve. Thank you, Mark.
Yep. Bye, guys.